Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to class, Center for Law and Social Policy. I'm David Stocklow, and I direct the Center for Post-Secondary Economic Success here at class. And we're really grateful to all of you for coming out today to talk about this important topic of how public benefits can help fill the financial gaps for low-income college students. This is part of CLAP's overall work. There's no single bullet to conquer poverty, but we work on a variety of different policy approaches. And so today's topic and our work more generally on post-secondary education, workforce development, really are part of that overall strategy to advance policy solutions to address barriers that low-income individuals face to escaping poverty and achieving financial success for themselves and their families. Strategies to enable today's college students to access and complete college. Need to take note of the changing nature of who today's students are. Particularly, these strategies can help low-income adults, many of whom are working and raising families, achieve economic success and obtain the credentials, post-secondary credentials that will help them succeed in the labor market. We'd like to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for its support of the Reimagining Aid, Design, and Delivery Initiative, RAD, which helped sponsor this work. And also thank our partners at the Urban Institute, which work with us on this particular piece of the RAD initiative. So now it's my pleasure to turn over to your distinguished moderator, Doug Letterman, who is the editor and one of 3 founders of Inside Higher Ed, and has covered many changes over the past several decades in post-secondary education policy and practice. He knows a lot about what's happening with today's students, and we're really grateful to Doug for joining us and for moderating this expert panel, so thank you.
Thanks for having me here. It's great to be at class, but I'm really pleased to be part of this program today. From the coverage of higher education in many of our leading newspapers today, and from the policy focus of some politicians, you might think that the biggest problems in terms of college access and affordability today are the Brooklyn barista who has $100,000 in debt from NYU, and the fact that the Pell Grant recipients are greatly underrepresented at the 8 Ivy League universities. I don't mean to belittle or make light of those issues. They're real. But sometimes we need reports like the one CLASP is releasing today, and the conversation that we're about to have, to redirect our focus to the kinds of concerns that, to my mind, federal financial aid and social policy are really designed to focus on, which is how to make college possible for those for whom it wouldn't be possible without real assistance from government and others. So we're going to, we've got a panel of really thoughtful people here today from various perspectives who are going to talk about this set of issues. And I think we're going to go, you're starting, right? So we're going to go in order from my left, or we're going to go you and then Angela. Okay, so anyway, to my immediate left is Amy Ellen Duke-Benfield, who's a senior policy analyst here at CLASP at the Center for Post-Secondary and Economic Success, and the author of the report that you have in front of you. She also worked at the Urban Institute before. I'm not going to go read the whole bio because most of you know how to use the internet and figure that out. The second speaker is going to be Angela Johnson, who's on my far left, who's the Executive Director of Enrollment and Student Financial Aid at Cuyahoga Community College in my hometown of Cleveland. And she began her work 25 years ago at Ohio State. And she's sort of will present the institutional perspective, because she's been carrying out some of these programs at Cuyahoga, which is one of the bigger and, to my mind, better community colleges in the country. And then in the middle of the two is Mark Mitsui, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Colleges in the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the Ed Department. Previously was at institutions as well, as president of North Seattle Community College, and worked in Washington Community College, several other Washington State community colleges, and he's also been involved at the state level in policy work on working on their performance-based funding plan. So he can sort of talk about the government perspective, both the federal and state level. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to.
Thanks. I'm delighted that you all joined us today for this exciting topic. Yes, the paper is dense at times. Hopefully hopefully the paper does demystify some of the mystery around the interaction between some of these programs. But to briefly provide you an overview with what I'm going to say, I'm going to talk a little bit about the level of student need that students are facing, why we need to consider public benefits as a possible support if we're going to get serious about more low-income students persisting and completing in post-secondary, some of the opportunities and challenges that exist when trying to connect students to public benefits. I'll provide a few examples for folks to give you a sense of what are some of the opportunities that exist out there, what are some of the recommendations that we have in terms of changing those policies. And then what can we do within HEA, the Higher Education Act, as that's being reauthorized to better support low-income students and connect them to benefits. And then closing in some of the challenges that are related to this work. As all of you know who are here, because I know many of you, that post-secondary credentials are a great investment for individuals, families, and communities, and that's why we invest a lot of time and energy in them. They lead to better returns in health and social and civic participation, as well as what class was really concerned about, providing greater earnings for low-income families. One of the principal barriers that students face these days is insufficient amount of financial aid. We've seen financial aid drop in relationship to the escalating price of college, and unfortunately Pell Grants and other forms of state aid have not kept pace with that. Unmet financial need among low-income students is a huge barrier for low-income populations. For students, the average cost for community college, a lot of people talk about how cheap community college is, or it's practically free already, but the average cost, when you can consider all the costs that go in, including living expenses, transportation, childcare, it's over $16,000 a year, and only a third of that is captured by tuition. And so that means that there are a lot of students out there who have real financial need, particularly those who can't depend on parental support. To provide you a couple, I'm going to try not to be like Marco Rubio, but I had to take some allergy medicine, so I'm a little dried out. But we have pretty decent levels of unmet need. For those of you who are familiar with the previous paper that we wrote around unmet need, the average unmet need for students in the lowest quartile is over $7,000, almost $8,000 a year. For part-time independent students in the lowest quartile, it's $3,500. And particularly hits low-income students of color hard, with Black students averaging over $5,000 and Hispanic students averaging over $4,000 in unmet need. And so what does unmet need do? It forces students to drop down to part-time, to take on more work, to do less of their homework, to work more hours, to borrow more, which I think there is a phenomenon going on. We're seeing more low-income students borrowing more than we have in the past, and sometimes drop out. And the research around why students do drop out shows that financial reasons are the leading reason why students do drop out, because they either needed to leave to go make more money for school, they simply couldn't afford, they couldn't afford their tuition and the related fees, and the opportunity cost of being out of the workforce. We also see high levels of work. Roughly 66% of young community college students work more than 20 hours a week. Research shows working more than 20 hours a week has negative implications for persistence and completion. And then briefly, when David brought up today's student, this paper, we wouldn't be talking about these issues, I don't think, unless an increasing number of students weren't non-traditional, weren't your typical 18-year-old going straight through, did not have the support of their parents. We're looking at more than a quarter of community college students are parents. 17% are single parents. Half of community college students are over 24. And so that's a very different demographic. And those folks then have a different set of needs in some ways than what traditionally we've had to be concerned about. Most of these students are trying to cover work, family, and school, balanced costs for childcare, transportation, housing, while they're trying to get education and training to lead to a better job. Some of you might be familiar with some of the most recent research that came out last week out of the Wisconsin Hope Lab and Sarah Golder-Grab and her colleagues that talked about I was sort of startled actually in their survey that found that half of students are facing a degree of food insecurity and or housing insecurity, and that 20% are hungry. Those are some rough figures to look at, but definitely emphasize then the importance of needing to look more comprehensively at financial aid, and that means looking at some of these public benefits streams that can help support non-traditional students pay for their child care, get health insurance, and pay for food. Unfortunately, there's a good side of here that some students would be eligible for these programs. There's also a difficult story to tell in terms of the fact that both on financial aid and the public benefits side, the administration of these programs happens at various levels of government, and that the policies aren't all nicely combined or aligned in a way that ensures that someone can maximize receipt of benefits while also going to college. Public benefit programs, just like financial aid, feature their own complex set of rules. Even Sandy Baum, who was one of our partners on this project, was shocked by that something could be as complicated, if not more complicated, than the financial aid need analysis, and yet here we are. And so I think, but I think that the fact is, you know, it does matter whether or not you attend part-time or full-time. It does matter whether or not you are even allowed to attend post-secondary to so qualify for some of these programs. Those are big policy challenges that exist in this field that I think if we're going to seriously talk about how do we overcome low-income, non-traditional student persistence and completion challenges, that we're going to have to look at aligning these policies. Just briefly, I want to highlight a couple things from the paper. One, you know, many of you may be wondering, are students eligible for public benefits? Are college students eligible? Unfortunately, it's not a yes or no answer for those of you who do any work in this area. Many states tie eligibility for state-administered programs for those pursuing post-secondary to part-time or full-time employment, which is a real challenge when we think about those 20 hours, despite what all the research shows. Two of these programs that I want to briefly highlight for you are SNAP and Child Care. SNAP has a complex set of rules. Some people think college students aren't even eligible for SNAP because the rules are so complex. But there are a set of exemptions for low-income students, particularly non-traditional students who are attending at least half-time. For instance, if they're working at least 20 hours a week, if they have children below a certain age, or if they're in a certain occupational-oriented program. With child care, states have a high degree of flexibility in terms of determining whether or not post-secondary attendance is even an allowable use for child care. So in a handful of states, you can't even use child care funding to pursue post-secondary education and training. In other states, you have to team that time with 20 hours of work a week. Or you, in some states, don't provide coverage for homework time and that kind of thing, so you start getting into some of the complexity of the rules. And unfortunately, the availability of child care assistance is severely limited. About 1 in 7 families across the country who are in need of child care qualify for those subsidies. And so obviously, in talking about child care, you can imagine a couple of those recommendations. States should ensure that their child care policies support post-secondary education and training attendance and do not limit it to those who are working, provide it for homework, and then also need to consider allocating more money for those funding streams, or even considering Minnesota has a standalone child care grant program for post-secondary students that's worth keeping in mind. On the treatment of public benefits by the federal student aid system, they're largely exempt except unemployment insurance. And this is an interesting thing I just want to flag, is that the student financial aid administrators, like Angela, have discretion as to whether or not they want to disregard, meaning take that money off the table, not use it in the financial aid calculation. And in the height of the Great Recession, DOL and Ed put out guidance to financial aid administrators encouraging them to not count UI benefits in the calculation of income. And so that is one area in which there is some challenge. The other area that provides some challenges around the treatment of student aid in calculating public benefits. there's a fine line here between direct educational expenses and indirect. When I say that, you may say, what's the difference? Direct is tuition and fees, indirect are living costs. This seems like a pretty antiquated way of organizing our view toward education costs, given the fact that increasingly things that used to be an indirect are more direct costs, and given the escalating unmet need that students face, needing to steer more of that, acknowledge that much more, that there isn't this sort of artificial trade-off between indirect and what's direct, that actually those indirect costs like food and housing are essential for a student to be able to persist in completing college. Both SNAP and housing are two policy areas that treat student aid differently depending on it, whether it's direct or indirect. There's much more detail about that in the paper. One way of potentially getting at this challenge would be to ensure that that financial aid, all of financial aid, is disregarded in these programs, and that it's considered also not taxable. And I also want to flag that for Medicaid, this has been a great opportunity. I was really thrilled to hear that the website almost broke down again last night because there are so many people applying for Medicaid. This is a huge change in policy for students over the last few years. Largely low-income independent students were not eligible for Medicaid. With the Medicaid expansion up to 138% of the federal poverty level, a lot more students are eligible for Medicaid now than in the past. And health care has been a barrier that some students have identified as a reason that they've had to drop out, healthcare expenses. And so the Medicaid changes are huge in that respect. One unfortunate change is due to how income is determined for Medicaid is that taxable student aid, and that means any aid going beyond direct educational expenses, again, there it is again, is counted as income in Medicaid and the premium tax credits. And so that's an unfortunate policy that we hope to see will change over time. So we hope that over time, like I said, those policies become more responsive. HEA has its own work to do as well in terms of being a supportive funding stream for the kinds of innovations that Angela and Mark are going to talk about from their experiences. We encourage federally funded programs such as TRIO and the Title III and Title V, strengthening institutions dollars to be allowable, that benefits access be allowable uses, particularly when we think about minority serving institutions and those high levels of unmet need that I talked about for students of color. We also think that Ed could do a better job encouraging and educating students about the availability of public benefits. They could provide information on the studentaid.gov portal as they do around veterans assistance and other forms of assistance. Ed also does a ton of outreach to high schools, to one-stop centers, to libraries, to try to help people fill out the FAFSA, and we think that Ed could also be educating students about the availability of refundable tax credits as well as public benefits at that time as well. We'd like to see the development of an interagency working group, and this is a big one because of because no one agency controls all of these programs. No two agencies do, actually 6 or 7 control it. And so if we're going to see an alignment of policies, we would like to see in this last year of the administration some collaboration across departments to try to sort out what are some policies that can change to better support low-income students persisting and completing. In closing, there are a few main challenges in doing this work, and I think it'd be remiss to not highlight them. One is the fact that these policies aren't aligned very well. So even though we fully support institutions trying to connect students to public benefits, there needs to be some policy work going on in tandem with that work on the ground at institutions. Also, colleges need to sort this out, and it's not an easy challenge, as Angela will talk about, but we do see more institutions developing that capacity. Third, many of these social programs are stretched. The waiting list for subsidized housing in New York, I believe, is over 10 years long. I mentioned the childcare numbers that are daunting as well, and that sequestration over the last few years have been particularly tough on those. And then I can't ignore the fact that arguing that more people seek out public benefits is also a little bit politically loaded. I like to think back on one of the presidents of the Benefits Access for College Initiative. Benefits Access for College Completion Initiative, Ed Hughes, he used to be the president at Gateway Community Technical College in Covington, Kentucky, said it's a short-term investment for long-term gain. And he was in an environment in which people were saying, really? Get more students on food stamps? And he said, yeah, this is my strategy. More students are going to get through, they're going to graduate, they're going to become taxpayers, they're not going to need assistance anymore, and we're going to have more successful graduates that way. So I think there's some reframing that's going to have to happen in this field as well. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this and look forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm always so excited to talk about this. As Amy Ellen knows, we feel like we've been around the country on this movement and trying to get people to think about this. And one thing I want to talk about specifically around why it's so important for community colleges. She did share with you some of the data about who community college students are and why that's really important. I've talked to a lot of schools who are not community college who want to do this work, and they find it even more challenging because of the student population, primarily deep new students and things like that. But I want to start by just telling you kind of why we got involved and why it was so important for Cuyahoga to be a part of this experiment, or for me, this movement now, and kind of thinking how health benefits really could help our students. We were invited to participate in initially applying for a grant to help support this, but we knew from the very beginning that if we got involved in this work and we were selected to be a part of this, this would be sustained. And we have to figure out in our organization, where does it fit and how does it fit, and then how do we continue to do the work. We conducted a gap analysis to really understand if our students would be students that could qualify for some of the benefits that you heard about earlier. And what we knew very, very quickly is that 80% of our students who receive Pell Grant, and that's 20,000 students at our institution who receive Pell Grant, receive the maximum Pell Grant. So 80% of those students who receive Pell receive the maximum Pell, so those are the neediest students. But what we learned early on is many of these students either already had benefits, knew a lot about benefits, maybe we're in a gap between how they keep their benefits, but their bigger gap was how do they stay enrolled and continue to be academically progressing, because that was contingent upon them receiving and continuing their benefits. So our program started in our academic affairs area, where our academic affairs looked at the completion and success initiatives around that. But in financial aid, the smartest people at the colleges, we knew that this is really a financial conversation. And if we weren't having the right financial conversation with students, they will leave. You heard Amy Ellen talk about some of the reasons students leave is financial. And most folks think that means financial aid, but it means financial. They leave to work, they have families to support. And so we knew that if we made this a financial conversation, we can get a little bit more buy-in from the students and from the families, but then having more direct individual relationships with students. So once we actually implemented the program and really helped students think about the public benefits as a part of their financial aid, we really redetermined and redefined what financial aid was at our institution and having the financial education conversation with students. We were able to tie the public benefits into our financial education. So we do a lot of one-on-one counseling with students about what's a Pell Grant, how do you keep your Pell Grant, what are the requirements around not just enrollment, but there's academic requirements around Pell Grant in terms of progression and completion rates, how they borrow loans and how they repay loans. But what we're hoping to do at that point was to really help students think to reduce their student debt in terms of borrowing loans, but apply for temporary public benefits while they're enrolled. And that was really important for Ohio because in 2008, our Ohio Board of Regents, our state had decided at that time that community colleges were so inexpensive, the direct cost, I guess, of community colleges were so inexpensive that they did not need to receive the state grant anymore. Only the private and public universities would receive that, and the proprietary universities as well, but not the community colleges, because those students were likely to receive Pell. Now, certainly I mentioned most of my students did receive Pell, but that was the state's thinking around that. But what we saw from 2008 to 2013 was at our institution a skyrocket in student loan borrowing, very dramatic. And then keep in mind, you're talking about borrowing for students who are very low income. So repayment is quite difficult. So and when you think about community colleges and how the completion rates are for some students, if students are completing, they borrow student loans that they cannot repay anyway because they're likely in the same financial situation because they've not completed. So they don't have a degree to advance to the next position. So it's this whole cycle that we thought about from our initiative perspective and why it was really important to help students reduce their student loan debt and to borrow and to apply for public benefits, which we knew they should be qualified for based on what we knew about their income. So we really had to think about the positioning in our institution and really the buy-in in our institution. We have 44,000 students annually. That's a lot of students for the financial aid office to get their arms around. So we really had to work strategically with everyone across the campus, and primarily our faculty. It had to be in the classroom, and faculty had to have those tough conversations. Amy Ellen kind of mentioned how Gateway was really interested in trying to focus in their community. It was tough for us to get faculty to think about having that conversation with students. One, they thought it was a little bit intrusive, maybe a little bit sensitive discussion with students. And then there's some political components that they didn't really want to talk about because they didn't believe in public benefits. So we had to get people to think that these are not public benefits in the way that is focused on helping students take advantage or folks take advantage of the system. It's really about helping students complete. And so we tied it to our success initiatives. And once we were able to get everybody to think about how our students have various needs around, because we deal with a lot of homeless students, we deal with a lot of under-resourced students, and we deal with a lot of students who certainly need child care and benefits related to health care. So we have enrollment, Enroll America is on our campus every week, helping students apply for health care right on campus. But our first notion was really about helping students reduce their thinking around student loan debt and applying for public benefits to kind of offset that unmet need and looking at it in that way. So we spent some time surveying our students and asking how we could implement this on campus. Where does it fit? Where is the best fit? We work very closely with our career services departments and making sure they understood when students come to them and they're trying to find jobs, it's because they have this financial need and how an opportunity for us to help them get some of these short-term benefits as well. So the challenge was, how do you get students to opt into this process? How do you get students to take the time? Because it's certainly easier to apply for a student loan than it is to go through the complexity, as Amy Ellen mentioned, in terms of applying for public benefits. But how do you get students to really opt in? So the way we made it a part of our financial aid process and really integrating it into the financial aid process, students believed that they had to at least go through a process to opt out versus opting in. And it took some time for us to get there. That certainly wasn't easy. There was lots of ways in our implementation we finally figured that out. And certainly working with some of the colleagues that were part of the Benefits Access for College Completion Initiative. But now students actually, when they complete the FAFSA application and their records are available in our system, they apply through our student portal to see, they do what we call a quick check to see if they're eligible for public benefits right on our website and our portal. And once they actually complete that quick check, we can tell what benefits they may be eligible for, and then we connect them to a group of folks that are new to us in terms of an initiative. Again, came out of how we developed the grant. They're called peer financial coaches. And our peer financial coaches are work study students who help students apply for public benefits and complete financial aid information. And the reason the peer financial coaches was so important to us is we know the peer-to-peer model works. We've had it at our institution for about 16 years, and we call them student ambassadors at the time, and they were really helping students around enrollment initiatives. But when we moved to the model for peer financial coaches, we also had students who were peer financial coaches who knew a lot about benefits. That was certainly a plus for us because they were users of a lot of different services. But they were able to help connect students to the benefits very directly in our office in one-on-one counseling sessions. We also had some group workshops as well, but we found that the one-on-one was a lot more meaningful for students. We were able to integrate the public benefits in the financial aid office from my perspective, very seamlessly. So when a student comes to financial aid, you don't know if they're coming for a scholarship, a Pell Grant, or public benefits, and that was really our intention. We wanted to make sure students felt some confidence that their information is anonymous. We initially started off in a department that was just separate from financial aid, and it was only for public benefits. But the problem with that, there was no integration, there was nothing driving the students to that department. We knew that they came to financial aid, we can drive the conversation around financial education, and then throwing the public benefits into the mix there. Some of our challenges was, how do you really get everybody at the institution to buy in? And I can't say that we've done that today, and we've been doing this for several years now. I can't say everybody's bought into it, but I do think it's always about having a conversation, focusing on our initiatives around social justice. During the time in which we started the initiative, at our institution we changed presidents. And I just will say from our perspective is we were really fortunate that both were really focused on social justice and equity. And so from going from one president that's been to college for like 20-something years, really focused on this initiative and really helping us when we launched it. And transitioning to a new president who was very familiar with the college, came back to us after being gone for 10 years, serving as presidents of other colleges with a very similar focus on social justice. And now we have at our institution that we launched this past year, a whole initiative at the institution focused on equity and social justice, and really focused on how do we really help. And Amy Ellen had some data about how African American students advance and how Hispanic students advance, and that's really what it's focused on. And being really intentional about looking at our numbers and trying to tell that story about how our students persist. But we thought that from public benefits perspective, it was more than just the financial part of how students receive these benefits and actually matriculate because of the indirect cost, but also about how the students actually persist. And so we tied it to some of our completion initiatives in a way that helped us to measure student success and completion. So we do look at data around how students complete if they had public benefits before they came to us versus those who may have already had them. The challenge sometimes, though, is knowing if they already had them, is that they answer the question on the FAFSA application, which they could have completed, many months ago. And is that current and relevant when they actually come to the institution? They completed the FAFSA in March, they started the institution in August. Is there a gap in there to where they still may or may not have benefits? So we do ask some of those questions to try to ferret that out. What we want to know is, have we helped them by applying for benefits, and has that helped them be successful and complete? And that's just important to us so that we understand why this work is so important. And then we look at how we help students to continue to complete and be reauthorized for their benefits, because as Amy Ellen said, there's various agencies that you're working with, and the timelines in which they can reapply for SNAP or reapply for childcare, they're all different. So you got to make sure you help the students then to try to get on the right timelines and do all their reauthorizations and recertifications, so there's no lapse. We've done some things, Amy Ellen made me think about some of the work we've done with helping students to find a part-time job so they can meet that 20-hour-a-week requirement to receive some benefits. And what we've done is help students who are very interested in working on campus with work-study positions, that they can work at least 20 hours a week. And so we've been able to identify departments that can help us with some of the attendance requirements around that, because you have to explain to the agencies that the students are enrolled at least 12 credit hours and they are working at least 20 hours to receive certain benefits. And so we have some faculty who are willing to help us with that, and we have some departments that's willing to help us with that. So we hope we continue with the work study program in terms of helping continue to recruit more students. We have a pretty modest work study program in terms of the funding level that we have with that. But certainly we know around work study how that also impacts student retention. So we believe it's important to help us to continue those funding levels to help students complete. I think that the biggest thing, and I know the crowd today is not mostly institutions. I'm mostly talking about this work with institutions, but I think the important thing to kind of think about, if this is something where, if your role is someone who can help influence an institution in this direction, help support an institution to launch some of this work is really having them really take some serious consideration about the cultural change at their institution, because it does take some dedicated folks to really think about why this is important and why it really helps students, and not really think about the social service aspect of it and any personal aspects of it, to really make sure that students can progress in this way, and how it's really helpful for students to really complete their degrees and stay funded to get to that end goal.
Maybe before we turn it over to Mark, Amy and Ellen, did you want to talk briefly about this?
Sure, I
Both
just,
you and-
yeah,
both you
I just wanted to flag,
Angela
because
mentioned.
both Angela and I have mentioned benefits access for college completion, but neither of us defined what it was. And it was a multi-year initiative funded at 7 community colleges across the country to provide seed funding to those institutions to start providing benefits access to low-income students, with a big goal on sustainability right out of the gate, because there was concern that once the money went away, would the services go away? And so how do we figure out how to build this into existing college processes so it just becomes a part of everyday business? And to plug another paper that'll be out in another month or so, we're gonna have a lessons learned paper from that initiative that'll be coming out. But Cuyahoga was a very successful participant in that initiative.
Mark.
Thank you. Well, first I want to congratulate GLASP on the publication, and Amy on the publication of today's paper, and for the work that you've done in this area. It's so important for students and for our nation in terms of being able to maintain opportunity. The PIOC study, Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, indicates there are 36 million low-skilled adults in this country, 2/3 of whom are working. And as the economy continues to improve, the opportunity cost of going to college only will continue to rise. So anything that we can do collectively to enable, to help our lowest income individuals in our country to be able to access post-secondary education is critical and important. And so thank you again to GLASP for the work that you're doing to illuminate how different funding streams can be leveraged in order to help folks access post-secondary education. Prior to coming to this position, I was a community college president at North Seattle Community College. And while I was there, we opened an integrated one-stop called the Opportunity Center for Employment and Education, and co-located and integrated employment security, DSHS, and the local WIB, plus the community college, and about 20 different CBOs. And we had Goodwill in the house, we had Air Washington, which was a TAC program, Literacy Source, YWCA, and others, to wrap services and funding around students, but also the local community, in order to help folks move out of poverty and into the middle class through education. And as Angela mentioned, so many of the lessons learned were hard fought, and that's another reason I'm thankful to GLASP for the access to the public benefits access project, to create a playbook for other institutions to follow. And so you don't have to go through it. There wasn't a great project like that when we got started. We would love to have seen that. So what we learned, though, was the importance of cross-training. That not only was it important for the community college staff to understand SNAP and WIOA and the other funding sources, it's also important for case managers to understand Pell. And I'll give you a quick example. More than once, I'd seen a case manager come up to the financial aid desk with a client and say, where's the check? And it often didn't end well. As you know, let's say SNAP, for example, education and training, is great for helping to get students started. If the case manager wasn't aware that the FAFSA is the starting point for applying for financial aid, after that comes the student aid report, after that comes the completion of the student's financial aid application file. Most financial aid offices have created checklists so that students know what it kind of documentation they need to provide. What worked a lot better is if a case manager knew about the checklist and could be, while the person is getting started on SNAP, could work with the student to remind them, hey, did you get that IRS form in? Did you get this in? It worked much better than when a case manager came up to the financial aid desk with a completed file and said, okay, SNAP is about to run out, here's Pell. Made the application process a lot more streamlined, so when SNAP ran out, boom, they could slip right into Pell, they could keep on going. Without that kind of integration, the student didn't get the funding, disappeared, we never saw it again. And so a key point, learning point for us at North Seattle was the importance of cross-training for folks to administer the different federal funding streams so they could learn about the nuances and the rules relative to each funding stream.
Mark, just can I interrupt just for my part of my ignorance, but so this is a case manager for the say the SNAP first.
Yeah,
and who isn't a college employee? Or
correct.
Okay.
Right. So that's part of the reason for having these CBOs in the house, right? Because many of them are the intermediaries for federal funding, and so we got them together. They participated in cross training. Case managers learned about Pell. Financial aid folks learned about EOA. And so they got a better understanding of what the requirements were. That, in addition to everything Angela mentioned, was an important learning point for us in that experiment. You probably have never experienced this in your own context, but getting 3 different state agencies to play together could sometimes be a challenge. And actually, this came about as a result of state legislation. It was a pilot project mandated by state legislation and brought everybody to the table, and it took a while to, it took about 9 to 12 months of cross-training where folks had a better understanding of each other's systems. And once they got there, and we worked to really integrate the CBOs plus all the different state agencies into the culture of the college, then it began to really roll. So that was sort of my personal introduction to the topic, and we saw what a difference it made for students in terms of being able to have a roof over your head, tuition paid for, food on the table, books in your backpack. More than one homeless student entered the center and then graduated 3 years later. And so I think that's what you're talking about here, right? You're talking about more students being able to do that across the country. So I'd like to switch to sort of the federal level, talk a little bit about what's happening there in both financial aid, but in some other interagency work. And as Doug mentioned and Amy mentioned, we've been able to increase Pell Grants in this administration. And the maximum award has increased by $1,000, funding by a significant percentage, the implementation of the American Opportunity Tax Credit as well. Early on, bipartisan Student Loan Certainty Act, 2013, to help stabilize those loans, but then we transitioned to the direct loan program to keep interest rates lower and to save money that could then be reinvested in Pell Grants. The pay-as-you-earn is part of the income-based repayment and income contingent repayment initiative. And in a couple days, there will be an announcement about the new website to help all of our direct loan borrowers transition and pay with FPYE. The FAFSA improvements can be confusing, definitely. So the IRS data retrieval tool was established so that there could be an automatic population parts of the FAFSA. Many of our financial aid guides have been translated into different languages. The partial restoration in 2015, I should say the new provisions around ability to benefit in 2015 helped to reopen a door that had been closed earlier for students without high school credentials, and we're working to increase adoption of the new provisions across the country. There also, in the 2016 budget, was a proposal for reform for the campus-based aid allocation formula, including federal work study, so that institutions that serve more Pell-eligible students would receive a greater percentage of the existing funds. No new money, but a reformulation that would allow for reallocation of resources. You also have heard, I'm sure, about America's College Promise, the President's proposal in the 2016 budget to make universal access to community colleges the norm, where 75% of the average national cost of community college tuition would be paid by the federal government, 25% matched by the states, and states would opt in to the program. That, of course, is a first-in model, so that students would still be eligible for Pell, and that would help meet the additional costs, of course, that students have. And so we're, of course, interested in getting bipartisan support for that. First in the World also came out, and we've been able to award $60 million in the last year, including to some community colleges, to develop innovative strategies for student success. We recently, Amy and Angela mentioned the importance of equity and being able to connect our minority-serving institutions to greater resources. We recently held a national convening of minority-serving community colleges and brought about 130 of these institutions to Washington, D.C. They met with 13 federal agencies. Chase Sackett, I see from HUD, is here. He was at the convening. We had also a wide variety of Department of Education folks meeting with the institutions to provide technical assistance on how to access federal resources for their students. We had funders there. So we're going to move forward with that as a launch point by creating communities of practice. These institutions serve a disproportionate share of underrepresented students in higher education, and many are under-resourced. So by being able to help focus resources and attention on these institutions and help create those communities so that they can exchange promising practices, we hope will pay dividends for students. And probably an area of innovation that relates the most to what we're talking about today is the approval in 2014 for what are called performance partnership pilots, P3. Congress authorized 10 pilots in 2015 that would allow the greater flexibility in pooling discretionary funds from among 6 federal agencies: Department of Education, Labor, Health and Human Services, Justice, Corporation for National Community Service, and Institute for Museum and Library Sciences. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Ghostbusters, and where they had those streams and you never cross the streams, or, right? The whole universe implodes. That's often what we're told about crossing federal funding streams, right? If you cross the streams, bad things will happen. So these are discretionary funding streams, not mandatory, but still it provides greater flexibility for the pooling and awarding of these funds. And so we just announced the first 9 awardees. For example, Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles, Los Angeles County Community College, and the LA Unified School District will be working together. And these particular pilots will focus on opportunity youth. But we're going to learn a lot from these pilots in terms of how different funding sources can play together, work together, focus on a specific population, and what kinds of outcomes will result from that. And we hope that this, in turn, can inform future policy initiatives and future policy making in terms of how different federal funding sources can be leveraged. So those are, I would say, the highlights. Certainly, WIOA is something to pay attention to, with the common metrics now across all the core programs, all the titles. And it's going to be, I used to measure my kids' developmental stages by WIA reauthorization dates. I know first kid was born, and now 17 years later, she's a senior in college. I guess the point is that WIA is going to be around for a while, so it's going to have a huge impact. So I think it's important for us to continue to pay attention as the regulations become finalized and see what kind of impact they have. But the idea is that there would be greater consistency across the core programs. Because they're going to be held to common metrics. And now everybody's got a stake in everybody else's success, and it should set the stage for better and greater integration of funding and support. So I also wanted to say there is more interagency work happening around a variety of different topics that it could lend momentum to what we're talking about today. It started with the job-driven training agenda, the president, prior to WEO reauthorization, getting all the federal cabinet agencies together and saying, okay, let's get aligned. It never really had happened before, and it did happen around 7 criteria for job-driven training. And we also now have the Financial Literacy Education Commission working on financial literacy, and there's a stream for community college students. Chase, I know, is working on housing and security, community college students there with HUD, and so we're in conversation all the time. So I think the timing is really good for this paper, for this concept, and for this issue to come out.
Well, so a lot of really interesting stuff, and I guess I'm inclined to want to see whether you all have questions for each other. But I guess the thing that jumped out at me in hearing you all talk was the tension, if not outright conflict, between some of the regulations and rules is really sort of stunning. And I guess I'm thinking about, I mean, I guess it seems to me there's such tension, and I guess I'd probably want to start with Angela at the campus level. The minimum enrollment requirement to stay eligible for federal funding and the minimum work requirements for some of these other programs seem to be, if not completely at odds, very much in tension, especially when we know. And so it sounds like you're doing some of the creative things about what kind of work students are doing. But so how fundamental is that tension? And maybe I guess I'd ask all of you in some ways, but how fundamental is that tension? And then I guess probably the question that ultimately would go to the policymakers is, what are the chances for bridging those, laying those out in a matrix and seeing how they conflict such that somebody might be able to rationalize them better? So maybe start with you, Angela, about what you see at the campus level.
So for the federal financial aid, there's some flexibility around enrollment. So students can be enrolled as little as 1 credit hour and receive some federal programs, but then maybe 12 credit hours for several others, 6 credit hours for loans. So there's some flexibility in the federal student aid programs. But connecting those with some of the public benefits is what the challenges are. 60% of our students attend part-time for various family reasons. So, but the programs that they need require them to at least attend 12 credit hours, like cash assistance. Some of the programs around SNAP, they have to work as well. And so some of them aren't working because they're focused on school. And so there's some flexibilities in the federal student aid program, but there are some conflicts with the public benefits, but it's more about what the students' life choices are because of their family situation and how those don't mesh in the same way.
Right, but I mean, and again, this is, and maybe this may be better for Danielle in some ways, but I mean, we certainly know, well, how much urging or encouraging do you do to try to get, and this goes to completion agenda, et cetera, but we certainly know that in general, students who are enrolled more are likelier to complete. So how much, I mean, do you just sort of let them decide based on their family circumstances? Do you urge, encourage, nudge?
So that's an interesting question for our institution. So from the financial aid perspective, I think it gets to what Mark said about cross-training. So from a financial aid perspective, we have lots of flexibility and want the students to do that. But from the academic perspective, which is our counseling and advising, which are faculty members who do that work, how much do they know about some of the public benefits and what that means to students' enrollment? And then and sometimes it's really about the academic course load that students can really maintain just based on where they are academically in preparedness and can they really do that. But our the good thing about some of the work we started is that our counseling faculty has been involved from the very beginning. So they knew about some of this work, and they know what parameters students need to maintain to keep certain benefits, and so that's been helpful. But it is a tricky balance around completion and then the student's academic preparation. But they've been the ones, the counselors and the advisors have been the ones helping getting the attendance forms signed that are needed for some of the benefits, and making sure that the students maintain the 12 credit hours that they need for some of the programs.
Amy, Ellen, I don't know if you want to take a shot at that, some version of that.
Yeah,
specific issue.
and it varies.
Yeah.
For instance, with TANF cash welfare, there's a 12-month limit on what's called vocational education and training. And then after that, states have the option of, do they want to allow students to continue in that, oftentimes combining with 20 hours of work. That comes from the federal government. CLAS has been very active in encouraging for a longer standalone time for students to pursue post-secondary while receiving TANF, but there hasn't been the right political environment yet to see a change like that. I see Elizabeth, my one of our TANF experts, trying to bite her tongue maybe on something here, but hopefully I didn't say anything too out of line. And then with SNAP, there are a set of 6 or 7 exemptions that allow you to receive SNAP if you're attending more than half time. A lot of these rules were designed to avoid the student who is rich but looks poor in college. Housing is another example of where you see policies designed in reaction to more of a negative than a positive. And so I think that the important thing is to try to get all of the right players at the table. And unfortunately, it's going to have to be players at the federal level, state level, and in some cases local levels, talking to one another like they have in Washington State. Washington is actually one of the leaders. When I did some of this research a couple years ago, talked to someone from Washington State in the Medicaid agency who talked about the way they package different programs, financial aid programs, including obscure funds such as the Carl Perkins funds that are available to a student, talked about packaging that in such a way that it wouldn't count against their eligibility for Medicaid. And so it's that, it's almost like you need to have that level of thinking at the state level or at the federal level. Look, we're all here working toward the same goal, that people need to have at least 1 year of post-secondary education and training. We know that earnings goes up as they, depending on their course of study, and more education and training. And so therefore, our social policies should be aligned, since the goal of those policies should be poverty elimination or amelioration. Our goals should be aligned in that direction toward allowing more education and training. But it's tough. It's a tough environment to encourage that kind of alignment. I think there are good opportunities, and Mark talked about a few of them that do exist.
Yeah, I guess, Mark, having been inside the belly of the beast here for a while in the terms of the federal government, it was interesting to hear you talk about some of those possibilities for not only cross-institution, cross-agency, cross-federal agency collaboration, but also with localities and stuff. So how optimistic do you, as you argue that really significant progress can be made there?
Yeah, I'm an optimist by nature, or I wouldn't be in the belly of the beast, I think. But I do see a need in some momentum on 2 fundamental levels. One is sort of on the policy level, and having a discussion here at class, for example, is helpful. I'm well aware I'm a political. I came with an expiration date. This is the end of the 2nd term. We'll have a new administration coming in. Having some momentum sort of in the private sector to talk about this can help keep the momentum going and ensure there's some voice being able to say, hey, pay attention, think about this. And so having the momentum sort of on the policy level, I think is helpful in thinking through sort of the long game, right? The long-term discussion that has to happen. On the practice level on the college campus and what's going on, being able to, again, as CLASP has done with your project, to create a community of practice where you can exchange those important learning points on packaging Perkins loans with Medicaid, or how to braid the different federal funding streams and have it play with Pell. All of those important aspects, I think, are good and important to be able to keep going. In terms of, what's the possibility of federal policy change? We have a policy approval process that can't really give you a real percentage on that, but just the fact that if it can bubble up through the different federal agencies, and I liked your idea of a landscape, being able to identify, what are some of the friction points in policy now? Where do they exist? Where do they appear to be in opposition to each other for this end result that we're looking for? So even being able to do that, I think would be very helpful.
It seems like this report is
Yeah.
practically there. I mean, you create maybe one more step to create a grid in your spare time.
Yeah.
But that seemed like you were heading in sort of in
Yes.
that direction, and it seems like that could be the kind of thing that would make people go, really? So one more question, and I want to turn to the audience and have you all join the conversation. I guess when a couple of you were talking, there's a lot of talk about student aversion to debt, particularly in, I know it sort of tends to be at least stereotypically described as being strongest in Latino populations, et cetera. But is there similar aversion to public benefits? Because you made it sound, the idea that Sandy Baum thinks or you described it being a lot easier to apply for a student loan than for these benefit programs, which obviously is just insane. But how much from an aversion is there? How would you compare student views of debt versus being on public benefits?
I think that there is some complexity, obviously. I know when I started this work and having been in financial aid for a very long time, thinking that this was more difficult. I mean, financial aid things change every year, but this is a lot more difficult to learn and understand. But I think that the aversion is the sensitivity to the issues and helping students kind of think about that and kind of get past this stigma of applying public benefits. And that's where we started. And that's where our challenge was in the very beginning, because we knew that we had to think about ways to talk about public benefits that students didn't feel dehumanized in some way. We went through lots of training. We had some folks come in and do some sensitivity training with us. It's really important to know, though, as we went through and we thought it was really in ways of thinking about the sensitivity, is that the students said, just say SNAP. Just tell us what it is. We spent a lot of time trying to be politically correct in how we help students think about it, and the students thought about, let's just be very simplistic about it. But the ease of applying for a student loan versus the process with the public benefits, and we try to, at our institution, keep most of the work on our campus. So the students do the pre-check on our campus. They can do the full application on our campus for our peer financial coaches. But at some point, they got to leave the campus and go to the county agencies and do some of that. We tried to work with our county agencies to have them come on campus. But some of that, there's some transportation barriers in getting back and forth to some of those appointments, missing appointments. There's a 30-day window to complete the process, or they start all over. Where those student loans, on the other end, you sit down, you do this entrance counseling, and you do the financial education about how you might use these student loans, and then you apply for it and you get it pretty quickly. But that's why the counseling is so important, and try to help students to balance that and see what really makes sense for them. I think the loans are the easiest part, but the hardest to maintain in the future, because they're not thinking about the future, about the repayment.
Of course, there's somebody out in the loan area. There's somebody who's interested in on the other end. Whereas for the lender side, so it's a.
Well, that's when it was lenders, but now it's all the U.S.
Well,
Department of
right.
Education.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. When there were lenders and there was some competition there, eliminating the competition is just helping students really better manage where they are.
Anybody else want to add anything on that? Questions from the audience?
With your use of the one-to-one coaches, I had 2 questions. One, it's a really great opportunity for sort of financial education touch about, I mean, there's such short-term pressing need to get some extra costs met, but you're taking on debt. Are you inserting that sort of as well into the conversation?
Absolutely. So beyond just the public benefits in terms of what we do for one-on-one, students actually have to meet with us one-on-one as they apply for loans. So when they apply for a student loan annually, they can just go through the regular process, which is they apply online, they can tell us how much they want to borrow. But as they want to increase their student loan, we do another one-on-one session with them. We tell them what their aggregate is. We discuss repayment in terms of if you graduated today, here's your total amount you borrowed, here's your monthly estimate. And so we do a lot of that counseling around loans. But conversely, in that conversation, we help them think about if you apply for this temporary assistance, you can reduce your student loan debt because maybe you can get some housing assistance, utility assistance, and some of those things to kind of offset that. You don't need a student loan.
And when you talk about, so in your portal, so it's this college's portal for applying,
Yeah.
you're doing a quick check for benefits. Did you create that? Did you use something that existed?
We work with the Ohio Benefits Bank, and in some of our initial work with the Benefits Access for College Completion, they were really a partner in helping us to use their data in their portal, in the Benefits Access portal, to use that in our portal. So that's how we track where the students applied. They applied with us directly, but it's all the information from the Ohio Benefits Bank. But they were able to allow us to add that information and link to our portal for tracking purposes.
And I'd add the fact that most states now have the availability to apply for public benefits via portal. They all call it different names. Some of them do use a benefit bank. Others have their own established means of doing so, has made this kind of work of applying at a CBO or applying at a community college that much easier. Where you run into some challenges is it might not, the process itself, the entire process might not be able to completely play out at the college. You might eventually have to go at the end of the day for an interview at the social services office. There is some, I would say, innovation in that area as well of trying to do phone interviews or Skype interviews and that kind of thing to actually allow all of it to stay on a community college campus or at a CBO.
I recall that one of the advantages to having a center on a college campus is that public assistance recipients don't feel like they're public assistance recipients, that they're going to college and they're on a campus and it becomes more the norm. The other advantage to the co-location is that students didn't have to go to they didn't have to take 6 buses to get to 3 different offices. That is a lot more convenient, all taken care of. And this particular center and others too have developed an online assessment that students in Washington, I think this was called Start Next Quarter, I don't know if they're still running it, where you answer a few questions and it says, okay, you could be eligible for this, this, and this, and check into that one.
It sounds like it's sort of like the quick check.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
So 2 questions. One would be, it's fairly straightforward. Is there any evidence, right, any research in the program that you mentioned that students who get these benefits actually persist to complete more than similar students who don't take that type of service? So that's the first thing. The other thing is, I get the sense this is coming from a good place, but at the same time, it seems like there could be this kind of weird situation where community colleges get the benefit of students not taking loans, and then the default rate won't be as high as it might otherwise be. So it seems like it could be like this thing that could be perverted. They could use it they could advocate for it for a reason other than the intended reason. Because if you have it where students aren't taking out loans but they're going to public benefits, but the question is well, what's happening after graduation? Are they getting jobs so that they have gainful employment? And there might not be as good an indicator, right, if they're not taking out loans and we don't see the ability to repay if they go to public benefits route. So if you could address that.
So from a data perspective, we are measuring whether or not the students had benefits before they came to us, whether or not we were helping the student with benefits, and how they complete. I will still say we're kind of early in the program because our student progression and completion, because most of our students are part-time, we don't have the graduation rate yet. But we do have some persistent rates where we know that between 5 and 7% higher for students that we've helped with public benefits than those who either didn't have benefits or had them before they got there. So we are helping students at a higher rate. The question about loans is a tricky one. If I understand your question correctly in terms of the benefits to the colleges and as it relates to the default rate, and related to whether or not benefits offsets the student loans, I think that's a little bit tricky to know. If more students are really saying that they don't want to borrow student loans and they're getting benefits, because sometimes they're actually getting both. Just because they're eligible for both, they actually get both. But I don't think that there's an intention that, I think beyond the public benefits, globally more institutions are thinking debt reduction is key to student success. But part of that debt reduction is accelerating time to degree. So schools are focusing on how fast students finish, so they're taking out less loans because they're finishing faster, time to degree. But I don't necessarily think, it's certainly a benefit to the colleges that the cohort default rates are declining. But I don't know if you could really make that parallel between the intention is that the schools benefit by decreasing their default rate by relying on public benefits to kind of offset student borrowing. I don't know if that's a correlation that's known or definitely not intended. I think everybody's concerned about student debt reduction and everybody's concerned about default rates. For lots of policy reasons, schools have to be really conscious about their cohort default rates.
Yeah, we did have an evaluation. Our project was very short. The ACC was 27 months, I think, and that may be stretching it. And so we weren't able to look at completion data. The data around persistence showed higher rates of credit completion. But again, I just say that was under a very short period of time. Gateway also did an ROI study that showed that it was worth enough to them that they were retaining enough students over their previous organization that they kept those 2 positions and funded those. And so I think that speaks pretty loudly if an institution is willing to go ahead and keep in place 2 new positions to help folks. One of the recommendations in this paper is that we have an experimental sites, a demonstration project of looking at what are the impact of public benefits on college students.
I guess the only thing I'd add on your second question is, I think it's certainly there's a legitimate tension there, and institutions have lots of reasons to try and get their default rates down. We see plenty of community colleges not letting their students borrow at all to avoid having high default rates. So we see institutions do this. I'd like to think this is an alignment where what they're trying to do for students helps them as well. But it's definitely a legit thing to be aware of, to be watching. Yeah. Go ahead.
I would just say, in response to that question, I'm with the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and we did a little bit of data analysis trying to use the survey of incoming program participation to look at, and other sources to look at that question about completion and whether it's approved by public benefits access. And I think the tricky thing is that people who are receiving public benefits are among the very lowest income part of the student population, and it's difficult to find exact correct comparison group. So personally I don't think you're likely to see huge increases in completion and retention because of it, but you may see some reductions in the kind of hardship that that Sarah Goldenbrock found in her report this week, and I think that that's a significant goal in itself, and I would imagine we'd expect some modest improvements in completion, but by no means would we imagine that this is going to be some gold windfall for the colleges, because so many of these benefits are very small and difficult to get. I think it's just a benefit for students primarily.
Right, but there's just one thing, it's just the, I think there's a study that came out that said the ones that default the most are not the ones taking out the most, but the ones taking out small loans.
Yeah.
So-
It's about
That's
the-
also, but that's mostly because I mean, that was that ACCT study that was really stunning. They also aren't completing any, I mean, their biggest problem for them is they're barely completing, most of them have completed barely any credits. I mean, so you're right, it's not about the dollar amounts that can get students to default, but it's whether it seems to be whether they stay in school and make
Right.
progress, so, yeah. In the back.
I was wondering if a lot of community colleges are now offering child development centers to their employees, and if there's been any look at merging that with allowing for child care subsidies to be used at those centers, and also accessing federal food funding through the Child and Adult Care Food Program, so students can actually bring their kids to campus and get the benefits of quality, affordable child care.
I don't know the answer to that question, but maybe Barbara does.
Yeah, I think there are campuses that are doing that, but sadly, the trend is moving in the other direction, where we're seeing those campuses with childcare centers closing them at a steadily increasing rate, because it usually does involve some investment of general funds on the part of the college, and they're looking for places to cut. So I think that's one of the places where, maybe we can look at integrated funding streams or some innovative solutions to try to keep that from happening and actually expanding access to childcare.
I know that's a challenge. We were an institution that had a child care center about 10 years ago, and we closed them. Before we started this work, we closed the child care centers, but it was cost. It was, and what we found too is that most of the clients were not our students. We found that most of them were folks from various parts of the community who would come in and use the services. And so we looked at that analysis too to see if it's benefiting our students in terms of the cost that there was a lot of cost in the general fund to maintain that.
And just a quick question about the number of students who this I didn't see, I haven't read the whole paper, but do we have like a baseline of how many students nationally we're talking about in this report?
No, I mean, do you mean like how many might be potentially eligible for public benefits?
Yeah, I mean, or the baseline of students going to community colleges, or?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had something of the same thought, is sort of how big is this pool of students that we're talking about, and it's probably, I don't know what the equation would be that would get you there, but I mean, I was just looking at the data on the number of, we obviously know the number of the percentage of free and reduced lunch. I mean, there have been some data on the number of students who have food insecurity. I don't know whether the survey, the Hope Lab kind of survey stuff is, it's obviously an important
Right.
One indicator, but I don't know what.
Yeah,
what's the
Kentucky, so this was interesting. It would be really great if states could match data. And it would be really great if the feds could match data, and Mark here could talk to his friends at FNS and at HHS and find out what's the overlap between Pell recipients and those receiving Medicaid or those receiving SNAP, and what's the gap here. Kentucky was able to do that as part of this initiative, and I'm not going to quote the numbers correctly because I don't have that report in front of me, but it's in the Benefits Access for College Completion evaluation report put out by Equal Measure, that they did a match between students who were on their campus and their income levels and students who were receiving public benefits, and found a gap of roughly 2,000 students on campus who they thought were likely eligible for public benefits. And that's a small institution. I think they only have 7,000 or 8,000 students at that institution. So, but that's only one institution. But this is the kind of work that we think states should be engaging in to get a better sense. And that's simple data sharing, that you could do, and then you could reach out to those students, and that's how some institutions have gone
Angela,
forward.
did your gap analysis provide any sense of that?
Right, so the 80% of the students who, of the 20,000 students who received Pell, 80% of the students received the maximum Pell. And we believe that those students would have all been eligible. They had a 0 estimated family contribution, so they would have been eligible. But there's a big percentage of those who are already receiving Pell. What we were trying to do at our institution, we're still trying to work on the MOU, is that our state would allow institutions to submit, but it'd be an institution by institution basis, but to submit student data to the Bureau of Labor Statistics to get some quarterly earnings, to do some estimates to see the students that were enrolled, if their income met some of the guidelines to be eligible for some of the benefits. We have some challenges with the MOU and trying to share some of that information, but we've been still trying to work through that.
Well, Mark clearly has an assignment. He'll report back to us by we're getting close to out of time. I don't know whether you have any, last thoughts you wanted to share. Angela, I don't know.
My final thoughts are probably, again, as I kind of mentioned in some of my opening remarks, is really thinking about how you kind of move this work forward and trying to help support organizations or colleges who want to take this work on. I think that's the biggest challenge is keeping some of the momentum going. We had a lot of support through the grant and the technical assistance through the grant, and it was able to help us push some of our state agencies to do some work a little bit differently. The momentum has died a little bit in some of the state agencies. They got a little bit busy, as they told me, with some of the ACA stuff. And so they kind of refocused some of their work around ACA and couldn't lend some of the support that we had. But I think it's about helping schools think about why this is important, if you have the relationship with some of the colleges, why it's important and why it helps students. And then I think to that end, helping schools then, because it is a cultural shift on the campus, is helping them understand how they integrate it in such a way that it becomes a real seamless process for students. And not, if it is financial aid, that it's really easy in the financial aid office to get bogged down with so many federal changes. I'm sorry, Mark. But it is really hard. I mean, you get bogged down with so many different changes and things that you're trying to work through in the financial aid. You got to keep this work really at the top of your priorities and objectives.
Well, this has been really helpful. It's a great exchange, and we'll take a lot back to the department to discuss. A couple of things I forgot to mention. Angela mentioned acceleration of students and student success, and the sooner students are able to complete, and the less debt they'll accrue, and their opportunity costs are lower. So we do have some experimental sites that are going on in financial aid. One is for competency-based education, and another is prior learning assessment, so that students get experience, could get credit for that. Another thing came to mind, and it was the job-driven training and the Upskill America initiatives at the White House. Of the 36 million low-skilled adults at the lowest levels of literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving skills, 2/3 are working, so 23 million or so are employed. And so it got me thinking about the employer contribution to this, since they're working. And we've heard from many major employers, there's an interest in being able to create career pathways internally for students while they're working to go to school and to upskill and to think about it. And one of the national activities we have going in Octave is on stackable credentials, so that it sort of is a credentialing system for working adults that mirrors the busy lives of our community college students, so that they can work, go to school, get a credential, and then not have to start all over again when they're ready to move up the ladder. So again, it got me to thinking about the employer component of this, since they tend to outspend the federal government by several factors in both formal and informal professional development investments. And then finally, work-based learning related to that upskilling. We're working with the Department of Labor on the Registered Apprenticeship College Consortium. And so many of the students are in the apprenticeship model and earning a pretty good wage while they're going to school. The goal is so that as they are progressing in their apprenticeship, they would also be progressing academically and be able to get an academic credential at the same time that they get their apprenticeship credential. There are other variations on that with paid internships and other kinds of opportunities. So again, this discussion got me to thinking about that initiative as well. So thank you for the discussion, again to CLASP as well for the work that you're doing in this area.
Last word.
I think that we really need to reconceptualize how we view financial aid and normalize this notion of providing comprehensive student supports. And so financial aid is just one, federal and state financial aid is just one part of the picture here, but that it is normal and regular and a good thing that low-income students have access to SNAP, have access to child care funding, have access to good health insurance, to be able to help them achieve their dreams of completing and getting a good job in the long run and not needing any of these supports anymore. But that while you're in college, you do have access to these and they do help you. And it's important. We may be talking about a small number of people, but we're talking about a population that has aspirations and goals that are no different than a traditional 18-year-old who wants to go to college and get a good job eventually. And so we need to just really think much more broadly about how we do support those students.
Well, and obviously, if we're talking about a small number of students who are actually going to college, there's probably a whole bunch more who could be.
Good point.
So, anyway, thank you to CLASP and to all of you for giving some time up on your busy days.